we're going to go ahead and move on here. We're going to talk about my favorite strategy, and I didn't even get to draft it. You drafted this team. Running back heavy early. You actually did what I did last year and went running backs in the first 3 rounds. I'm really excited about this team. I want to hear what you got to say about it. I think it's a great team. So go ahead and give us your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I've never. I mean, I'm in our league, the Red Zone Warriors league that we have. Cushman and Jimmer and I are in. That I'm the reigning champion, by the way. Um, I'm. It's a keeper league, so you're allowed to keep 2 players in that league. So it's a little bit different. I don't think I've ever in any other leagues where that was not a keeper league, PPR or standard, that I've ever drafted 3 straight running backs. I don't think I've ever done it. In a keeper league, if I was keeping 2 running backs and I drafted a running back in that first round, it's just a different situation altogether.
It
But
felt good, didn't it?
yeah. So let's go over this team real quick. So I was in the one hole, so I was drafting first. I went with Jamal Charles. When it came back to me, of course, I had to wait forever for that. I was able to get Alfred Morris, and I know he's not like a big PPR guy, but he's still a legit running back. He's going to get you a ton of points. And, at the end of the second round in 12-man league, he's a great pick there. So I went Jamal Charles, Alfred Morris. Then I was on the turn, and I almost went, my gut said I wanted to go wide receiver there, but for purposes of this podcast and getting material, I decided to go ahead and pull the trigger on yet another running back just to see what would be available to me, basically 2 rounds later when I was having to wait, for it to get back to me. I went ahead and picked up Andre Ellington. And Andre Ellington is, he's screaming up draft boards. People are nuts and crazy about him. I mean, they're talking about the head coach and offensive coordinator there in Arizona about basically constructing the offense, or at least the running game, around Andre Ellington. He's going to probably be a beast in PPR league. So again, Jamal Charles, Alfred Morris, Andre Ellington. So when it came back to me, the next 3 picks, I was nervous, so I went wide receiver with all 3 of those picks. And I still was able to get Roddy White, who's a PPR giant. I know Julio Jones is back, but still, those guys are going to kill it again. Malcolm Floyd, who both me and
Michael Floyd.
I'm sorry, Michael Floyd. We're both super high on him. I mean, he's
Yes.
got a potential to be a top 12 guy.
He was
PPR
amazing.
leagues.
He was amazing later part of last season. I actually had him on my team. He put up some pretty good points. He's a dynamic guy who can catch the ball. So
Yeah, this is one of those. He's in his going into his 3rd year breakout candidates for just really crushing it. So I was able to get Roddy White, Malcolm Floyd, and then I was still able to get Emmanuel Sanders. And any wide receiver you can get in that Peyton Manning Denver offense is something to look at. So I was able to do that, and then I went ahead. I got Jason Witten in the 7th round. I pulled trigger on quarterback in the 8th, which was still late streaming essentially, although I didn't draft a second one. I got Cam Newton. I still feel pretty comfortable with just keeping him alone. No Sean Moreno. This was kind of before some of that stuff broke out about him. Anquan Bolden. What is Eric? Tight end wise, I waited quite a bit to get those guys, but I think you still need to do in this philosophy. So anyway, at the end of the day, I think it was a pretty good team. It turned out surprisingly well, and again, that's to your point, Jay. Wide receivers are so deep, especially PPR just adds another probably 20 or 30 relevant wide receivers to the mix, unlike in standard leagues. So I clearly probably have, if Andre Ellington pans out, probably have the best running back core of the mock draft that I was in. And I was able to follow those 3 up with 3 really good PPR wide receivers, and then able to get another good PPR tight end with Jason Witten in the 7th, and wait and get that value for Cam in the 8th. So I think if Cam does have a decent year, which I still think he will, again, if you've heard us in previous podcasts, Cam has always finished in the top 5. He's always had a bad set of wide receivers around him. That's just the nature of the Carolina offense for some reason, unfortunately. So I don't think he's any worse off than he was the previous 2 or 3 years from a wide receiver perspective, and he's always finished top 5 because of what he does with his legs and his rushing touchdowns. So if he finishes above his ADP, which I think he will, getting him there was a good value, and I think this team would be incredibly consistent.
yeah, I agree. When I saw you go 3 running backs, I was like, whoa, here we go. I mean, like I said, I did it last year. It wasn't something I planned. I usually go running back in the first 2 rounds and grab a couple wide receivers, but I went running back in the first 3 rounds, and lo and behold, I made the championship last season. Later losing to Dickhead over there, but look, the first three running backs here are obviously good. They were the first three picks. What really surprised me a lot was the depth you were able to grab at the rest of the positions here. I mean, we already talked about these wide receivers. Roddy White, Michael Floyd, Emmanuel Sanders. These guys all, well, at least Roddy White and Michael Floyd. I'm not super high on Sanders. Like you said, he's part of the Peyton Manning offense, so he's going to score points. How many is the question? But Roddy White and Michael Floyd, man, great wide receivers. Grabbing Golden in the 10th. And Miles Austin in the 14th. That's an interesting pick, Miles Austin in the 14th round. He's in Cleveland now. I mean, Josh Gordon's gone. We don't know what the quarterback situation there is really going to be. But somebody's got to catch the ball. So, I think I'm kind of hoping that it's going to be Jordan Cameron and Miles Austin. Be kind of nice. I really, really like this team, though. Like you said, if Roddy stays healthy, Michael Floyd has the season we're predicting, then your wide receiver 1 and 2 are solid. And you can throw Sanders in if one of them's struggling. So, this is by far and away my favorite way to put a fantasy team together. I've used this philosophy over and over. It helps me win championships. Wide receivers super deep. I mentioned that earlier. Running back, not so much. There's like wide receivers. There's usually 2 guys on every single team in the NFL. There's usually 2 receivers on every team that you might be able to plug into a fantasy lineup and get some decent production out of. Most teams do not have 2 running backs that you're going to get decent production out of. They've got 1. Sometimes they do running back by committee, which is even more of a fucking nightmare. So I think it's a much safer gamble to take a lower tier wide receiver later, get your running backs earlier, because you do not want that running back by committee, and you do not want to be stuck starting a second string running back as your running back 2. Because you're not going to like the outcome of that for sure. And just to add one more thing here, part of my other reason is this: I hate handcuffs. I never draft guys handcuffs. To me, it's a waste of a roster position. So, again, my opinion, opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and they usually stink.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I think it's nice to at least get a guy at the running back and wide receiver position that you can hang your hat on, you feel comfortable leading your team with, and you fill those other spots with upside guys. I mean, I think we've talked about this in the past, but I think this year especially, just given the depth at wide receiver and so forth, I mean, I think if you have to suffer at any position, I'm not too. I mean, you probably differ about this a little bit just because you're a little bit more wide receiver heavy than me. But I don't mind suffering a little bit at the running back 2 position, depending on how many flex spots you have and that sort of thing. But if you're playing a standard start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 flex, a tight end, and so forth, I think suffering a little bit or going for those guys in later rounds that could break out, or maybe grabbing somebody off the waiver wire, which always happens every year. The RB2 position is where you can at least come out of your draft seemingly a little weakened and ultimately be completely fine. But if you're playing in leagues where you have multiple flex positions and so forth, then that might change your strategy a little bit. But we'll kind of get into that later. So.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's my favorite way to do it. It's worked really well for me. I like getting those running backs that I don't have to worry about. Wide receivers, I get more of those off the waiver wire, it seems to me, that produce than running backs off the waiver wire.
So anyway, I think that's it for our show this week. On our next show, we'll be talking about daily fantasy leagues. This is kind of where this seems to be going, and all these people are excited about these daily fantasy leagues. I know Jay dabbled in this for the first time last season. So, what are daily fantasy leagues? How do they work? How's the strategy different when you play these versus what you do on an every week basis in redraft league? So we're going to kind of get into the meat and potatoes of playing daily fantasy and break that down for you. Kind of on a side note here, we'll also be giving away a free entry into a $25 league at Derby City Fantasy, or actually derbycityfootball.com. So derbycityfootball.com will be giving away a free entry into one of their $25 leagues. So keep an eye out on our Twitter account at Red Zone Warriors to find out how to win. We'll be doing some promotions here in the next couple weeks before our next live show. So in the meantime, go to redzonewarriors.com where you can watch all of our previous episodes, see our rankings, and subscribe to our show via iTunes. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter and tweet us all your fantasy football questions at Red Zone Warriors. So for the Cushman, I am Rob, the Commish Smith. And remember that if you are taking a fantasy off season, then you are already losing. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.